Okay, so what do all of these things that might be causing us stress have in common? We've talked about bad news overload, a feeling of helplessness, the the survivor guilt that can come from occasionally letting yourself feel okay while you know the rest of the world's burning, or even just outright pure fear. Basically, all of these things are thought. And in order for me to explain a little bit about what I mean, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I've learned over time, again, from studying some amazing authors and teachers about my relationship to my thoughts and the feelings that go with them, because that has changed everything for me. As somebody with anxiety and depression, coming to recognize what for me is the true nature of thought has allowed me to intervene in my own thinking in a way that allows me to access a lot more positive feelings of well-being. So if you think about it, let me give you a couple of resources in case you want to do some more research on this topic after I talk about it, in case you're curious or inspired to learn more, because I love these teachers and they've changed my life. The first and my most inspiring teacher is Byron Katie, and she wrote a book called Loving What Is that changed my life. I've done a lot of work with her down in California in Ojai and gone to a bunch of her in-person teaching, as well as, used the resources of their group, and it's incredible. Loving What Is. Also Eckhart Tolle, and my favorite book of his is The Power of Now, although what I really love are his later podcasts and videos where he works with people. John Kabat-Zinn, an older sort of Buddhist teacher, wrote a book called Full Catastrophe Living, which is pretty amazing. And then Pema Chodron, who's an American Buddhist nun, has written a lot of books and done a lot of speaking, but one of my favorite books of hers is When Things Fall Apart. And I draw from all of these teachers as I work on my own journey, because they've all taught me that when you can realize that you are a being who thinks, it gives you a little bit of separation between the content of the thoughts that constantly flow through your mind and who or what you really are. You might have heard before the concept of the observer mind. The best analogy I have that helps me visualize this for myself is to think of a beautiful sunny day with a bright blue sky, cloudless, clear crystal, and then to imagine that there are some clouds that float by, maybe some thicker clouds that get darker, and they might rain or hail or thunder and lightning, and then they pass. And then the next set of clouds rolls by, and then you see the blue sky again. In the analogy, the thing that helped me differentiate myself from my thoughts is to imagine that the thoughts are those clouds that pass in front of your view of the sky, and that you are the sky. You are the sky, and the clouds pass by. They don't change the sky. They don't affect the sky. The sky is really something intangible, and the clouds are temporary, and they are like weather. And our thoughts and our feelings, the way that they combine together, they go through us like weather. Weather's almost always temporary, and it changes moment to moment. And so if you remember that you are the sky, and that the thoughts that go through your mind, everything from society might collapse to what if I catch coronavirus, to positive thoughts like, gosh, I bet everything's going to be okay. Every single one of those thoughts is temporary, whereas you are having thoughts, and you are beyond those thoughts. You are not the content of the thoughts. And so you can have a little bit of distance between yourself and those thoughts that go by, where you can observe, oh, look, I'm having a stressful thought. Oh, look, I'm having a peaceful thought. So, with that concept in mind, it helps me to recognize that even though I'm the blue sky, I sometimes get identified with a thought that's going through my mind. So if I get really caught up, something grabs my attention and takes me on a spiral of thinking into the content of a thought, then I lose perspective. I'm no longer the observer, I'm caught up. And when you're caught up in a thought, you're not in the present moment. Any kind of getting caught up, and especially when it comes to what we're talking about right now, which is fear and anxiety, if you're paying attention, and you can have any perspective, you'll recognize you're not in the present moment. All fear is projection into the future, and almost all fear is asking, what if? What if things get worse? What if the healthcare system gets overloaded? What if our supply chain collapses? What if my business folds? What if I lose my job? What if I don't have enough money to pay rent? All of these feelings are what ifs, and they're in the future. And what you'll notice is that means if you're thinking about that stuff and you're caught up and imagining and playing scary movies in your head about what might happen, you're not present. And so my first strategy when I recognize that I'm caught up in something stressful, and the way I can tell is that I'm stressed out. I'm feeling anxiety. I'm worrying. I'm feeling anxious and afraid. I might feel sad. I might feel disconnected from the people around me. Any stressful feeling is an indication that you've been caught by a stressful thought. And when you recognize that, the very first thing that can help is to pull yourself back to the present moment and ground yourself in what's literally happening in your life right now. So the way I do that is I will, when I catch myself spiraling, I will actually, it feels a little disorienting sometimes. It's like a slingshot or a rubber band that's been stretched really far. When I come back to the present moment, it's almost jarring because I'll be like, whoa, I'll feel myself suddenly land in my body. I will feel the seat or the cushion beneath me supporting my body. I will recognize that there's a temperature in the room. I might look around and suddenly remember, the house that I'm sitting in, the beings that are around me. My dogs, for instance, might be sitting right next to me, and I'd totally forgotten that they were there because I was off somewhere in my thoughts. I might remember who else is in the house. Maybe Travis is, sitting across from me. I will recognize what the quality of the light is in the room. I might notice if there are any scents or smells. Maybe Travis is cooking something, and I'll just come physically into my body. I will feel the energy field inside of my body, the sense that I'm alive. I will notice that I'm breathing. I might even, take a deep breath when I realize and remember that I'm breathing. I might feel my heart beating. I might just get I might lay my hand on my leg or on my chest to just feel the physical presence of my body in the present moment. And that snaps me out of it for a minute. That pulls my thinking out of the future and into the now. And when that happens, I recognize that everything I was thinking, all the movies I was playing in my head about all the fearful things that might happen, that they're not real. They're imagination. They don't exist except for in my head, and they're not about what's happening in my life now. It's a completely made up story. If we were to find out, by looking at the news that, oh my God, they discovered a vaccine, then that was 100% effective, then suddenly I would know that nothing I was thinking was real. And there's 100 ways that we can disprove the content of our fearful thoughts and challenge and question about whether it's real. It's hard when you're caught up in it, but in the moment you can recognize, wow, what I was believing wasn't real. What I was thinking was taking me out of the present, and just ground yourself. So grounding yourself in the present moment is step one, when you realize that you've been caught up in thought. And then step two is a process where if that thought cycle, if the fearful thoughts were really sticky, there's a process called the work. And this is what Byron Katie created. And that's, again, what's talked about in the book, Loving What Is. When you do the work on your stressful or fearful thoughts, what that means is you go through a four-step process where you question them. You don't try to talk yourself out of them. You don't say whether they're true or false. You don't really argue with anything other than question whether they're real, and follow the process that she set up, because it's super, super helpful. I'm going to do a separate podcast on Shireen doing the work about a stressful thought, probably society might collapse or something like that, to walk you through what that looks like in this kind of a situation. But the main thing is that the more you can do to help yourself remember that thoughts are not reality, especially stressful thoughts, if you can ground yourself in the now and disconnect yourself from the content of your thinking and remind yourself that the minute you come back to reality, when you look around your life right at this moment, you are not in immediate physical danger. You're not starving. You are in a warm house. You are sitting, with the people you love, probably. Even if there are some, stressful things happening, you are still okay. That can really diffuse those thoughts for you. And it's going to be really tempting. All of us are really tempted to spiral right back out into new fearful thoughts. But every single time it happens, just bring yourself back, connect to your body, connect to your breathing, and just rest in the actual physical okayness of this moment. And that really makes a difference to diffuse things. Once you have become adept at questioning your thoughts and learning how to turn them around, and maybe even find the opposite that could be as true or truer than the stressful thoughts that you were feeling, and you are better able to pick a better set of thoughts, that can be super helpful. So if you recognize that any thought about the future, whether it's stressful or peaceful or hopeful, every one of them is made up. None of them are real, because nobody knows what's going to happen. Then you get the chance to decide which set of thoughts you want to dwell on. And so once you realize that you can choose whether you focus on stressful thoughts or peaceful thoughts, you can substitute. When you find yourself worrying, you can substitute a different set of thoughts. So another wonderful teacher that I follow, her name is Marie Manuchehri, and she's an energy intuitive and a very, very wise person. She, at the beginning of this crisis, sent out a newsletter that had a whole bunch of substitute what ifs for people who were worrying. And one of them was, what if the world is healing? And it was one of like 12 or 13 that she wrote down, like, what if my neighbors are fine? What if my health is great? What if everyone I love is safe? What if the world is healing? And that has been a source of constant reassurance to me that if I hold that in my mind and I let my mind play movies about what if, we solve our problems? What if we find plenty of resources to handle this tragedy? What if somebody invents a vaccine? What if this changes our society in a way that yields greater good? We don't know. That could be just as true or truer as society is going to collapse or the world is dying. So that is the thought that I remind myself to hold every time I find myself worrying. What if the world is healing? And you can find that kind of an opposite thought for pretty much any fearful thought that's plaguing you right now. What is the opposite? And what if that were as true or truer as the thing you're worrying about? And let yourself, if you're going to get lost in some thoughts, let yourself get lost in the hopeful one. And that can actually be a very powerful way to combat the chronic stress and worry that all of us are feeling right now. So there's there's a few other things that I find really helpful. And one of them I learned from Pema Chodron, and it was about loving kindness meditation. And again, if you read her book, When Things Fall Apart, it's universal that life goes to hell every once in a while for almost all of us. And how do you get through a time like that in a peaceful way? And how do you have compassion for people around you without losing yourself and your own well-being? This part is how I combat my sense of survivor guilt, where I feel a little guilty for being really okay while so many other people are suffering. And so what Pema Chodron has you do is to really focus first on, if you're imagining the suffering of others, to, and this is my sort of simplistic hacked way of doing it, to send an image of light and love and kindness into that mental movie that you're playing for yourself, that you send energy and love and kindness to those imaginary people in your mind who are suffering, or to the people you might even know who are suffering, so that some of your okayness gets transferred to them energetically. I'm not saying this is real, but I'm saying this is a mental exercise that can be very helpful, so that your well-being and okayness can actually be mentally shared in a way that raises your thought vibration. If you're feeling helpless and hopeless and scared and guilty, those kinds of feelings bring your energy down. But when you hold hope and kindness and love, those feelings and thoughts raise your vibrational energy as a being, because so much of what we are is thought and feeling and the observation of that dynamic inside ourselves. If we can operate at a higher vibration, it's science-based that we have higher access to our better reasoning, our own sound judgment, our highest self, so to speak. If we can access our well-being and our higher self and stay in a sense of feeling good and kind and loving and generous, then the kinds of things that we are able to do and manifest in the world from that higher vibrational place are actually much more beneficial to ourselves, our families, our community, the world, than if we were to get stuck and lost in fear and depression and anxiety. So really, there's the very best thing that we can each do as individuals is to stay centered and calm, find our highest sense of well-being, grounded in the present moment, grounded in compassion, but from our sense of okayness. And we can actually make the world a better place the more okay we are, because we have access to more inside of ourselves that can be useful and helpful to the world and to others. So, for instance, if we found ourselves obsessing and getting scared and really losing energy and feeling terrible and wanting to, isolate and hide and eat and, stress because we felt there was a supplies shortage for the people on the front lines dealing with this health crisis. And we just spent hours reading the news and munching on chips and just, letting stuff slide in our lives, and in neglecting the people right around us, or our dishes, or our house, or whatever. Everybody knows what that spiral looks like. If we were in that spiral, what would come out of that would not be healthy. It wouldn't be good or beneficial. We'd be almost a burden to the people around us, watching us stress over what's happening. And we're not very accessible to anybody that we care about. If instead we're remembering to be in the present moment, and that, the sense of okayness that we've just talked about, it might be that knowledge that there's a shortage of supplies can turn into something productive. A friend of mine actually brought out her sewing machine and started using some of the fabric that she had to make, and she's a talented seamstress, but to make masks that she can share with her friends and family. They're not the N95 masks that, keep the particles, the virus particles out, but they certainly can help prevent the spread of the virus. If you're walking through the grocery store and you have it and you don't want to, contaminate other people. There's just so much more creative energy that we have access to if we are in our own well-being and asking, what can we do to contribute? Or we might, if we're worrying about all the people who are having to stay at home and maybe losing their jobs, or we might make a phone call to somebody that we know who's stuck at home and maybe doesn't have a partner or doesn't have family around them and they're lonely, and you might be able to be a resource and a support to them. Maybe there's ways that we can help in the world from a sense of well-being that would be the opposite if we were in that sense of despair. And so that's a really good reason for you to go ahead and invest in this. Put the survivor guilt aside, because the better off you're doing, and how you're feeling, the more you're going to be able to be a resource to other people. In my 20s, I had a phobia and I keep remembering all of the work I did to snap out of that phobia, which I did. And it's been really helpful now to remember what it was that occurred to me that helped me heal from that. So my phobia was driving across bridges. I just hated driving across bridges. I would drive far out of my way to avoid bridges, especially the Ship Canal Bridge. I couldn't drive across bridges for a long time without imagining the bridge collapsing and me getting, falling, and my car getting into the water and getting stuck in my car underwater. I mean, it was a terrible and terrifying movie. And we have a lot of bridges around here. And so, I struggled with that fear for a long time after I first started driving and I was in my 20s. And one day I was stuck in terrible traffic in the middle of the Ship Canal Bridge, and I was finding myself about to hyperventilate. I was really terrified. I'd found very little comfort in the traditional ways of managing phobias. But I was in the middle of this bridge, and it occurred to me that my phobia was about dying. It was, a specific way of dying that was particularly terrible. But my phobia was about dying. And the reason I didn't want to die was because I loved being alive. And the reason I loved being alive was that I wanted happiness, and I wanted the opportunity to pursue happiness and to experience my life and be in the world. I was afraid of losing that. But it suddenly occurred to me that in my terror about losing this life that I wanted so much, every moment that I spent imagining myself falling off a bridge into the water was stealing the very happiness of life that I wanted for myself. Because sitting in that car on that bridge, I was fine. Nothing had happened to me except in my thoughts. And when I let myself fall in my mind off the bridge and into the water and struggle to survive, I was wasting a single precious moment of my life that I wanted to protect so badly. And the irony of that really struck home, where I realized I was wasting this life I wanted in imagining all these terrible things. They weren't real. It's never happened to me. Obviously, all that time I spent imagining it never came to anything. And that might be true about this virus. It might be true that most of us are going to be just fine. And yes, we have compassion for the people who are suffering, but losing our own happiness and sacrificing our own present moment to terror does not help them. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help ourselves. It doesn't help the people directly around us who depend on us. It doesn't help the country or the world. It doesn't help the poor. It doesn't help the sick. All it does is steal our vital, precious moments that we have to live, and stops us from doing anything helpful or productive or joyful. And that not only does it not serve anyone, but I bet you that the people in a hospital bed right now, what they're worrying about, if they're afraid, is that they might not have the life that they wanted to go back to, that they are, possibly going to die and lose that life that they find so precious. And I bet you they would give anything to be in our situation where we're not in a hospital bed. We might be worried, but we're fine and our family's fine. They would give anything to have what we have. And so sacrificing that in our minds when we don't have to is essentially putting ourselves into the position where we've given it up without needing to. We've given up what we want and what is so valuable to us without needing to. And we've given up something that others who are suffering would give anything to have. And so out of respect and out of gratitude, it's one of the highest, best things that we can do to actually stay in the present moment. Remember that we're fine. Find ways to act in hopeful, helpful, loving, kind ways in the world. And that is the very best that each of us can do in this situation. And I'm hoping that this perspective, these are just, the inner ramblings of my mind as I cope with my own anxiety. I'm hoping that this perspective gives you permission and encouragement and maybe even a few helpful steps to give yourself permission to feel grateful for the things that are still going well in your world, your health, your well-being, the well-being of your family and friends, and use that positive energy to do some good in the world today. So thank you for listening. We're going to list some of the resources I talked about here in the resources section under this recording. And I wish you health, happiness, and well-being out there in the world. And thank you for your attention today.